everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us for our live stream event that we have today. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore, and just a couple of updates about the store itself. We just want to let you know that 3 of the 4 stores are currently open for limited hours. And what that means is that we have stores that are open 6 days a week, depending on the store. And then we're open from 10 p.m. till 6 p.m. at our Aspen Grove locations and our Colfax Avenue location. It's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at our Union Station store. And we are requesting that customers wear masks. We're letting in a certain number of people at a time. And we're also providing disposable gloves so that you can touch the merchandise as well. We've also removed any of our fabric furniture. There are still some chairs to sit in that we wipe down on a daily basis. So you can come and do that as well. Our coffee shop at Colfax is also open if you're interested. And as always, our website is open 24/7 for shopping. And thank you for your continued support through online book orders. I also just want to let anyone know that might need it. Closed captioning is enabled for this video. And we do tomorrow have a live stream for any of your maybe younger readers in your life. We have children's book author Avi and the illustrator Brian Folka are talking about Ragweed and Poppy and the 25th anniversary of that series, which is crazy to think about the fact that that book series is 25 years old now. But today we're actually going to be talking about butterflies. We have author Wendy Williams here and her new book, The Language of Butterflies. Science journalist Wendy Williams has spent her life outdoors, either on the back of a horse, on skis, or on her own 2 feet. She has spent a great deal of time in a variety of countries, in Africa, walking in the fields and forests of Europe, and exploring North America mountain chains and prairies. She lives on Cape Cod in Massachusetts with her husband and her border collie Taff, and she's the author of The Horse, and then, like I said, her newest book, which came out in May, The Language of Butterflies: How Thieves, Hoarders, Scientists, and other obsessives unlock the secrets of the world's favorite insect. So I'm gonna have Wendy join us now, and we're gonna turn on her video. Here we go. We'll get her started just there in just a moment.
And how's that?
There she is. Hello. How are you, Wendy?
I'm doing well here on Cape Cod. Like we were saying before, it's getting hot on the Cape, which is annoying, but
yes,
otherwise it's fine.
Well, I'd love it if you could start with just a little bit about, give us an introduction to The Language of Butterflies and what the book is about, if they can't already tell by the wonderful subtitle that you have there.
Well, you know, a lot of people are asking me, McKaylee, how I came to write this book. Mm-hmm. The first thing is I'm really, I guess I could say my books are kind of Zen, and that I'm interested in the energy of life and how that manifests itself in evolution. We live on a planet that has a molten core that sees with energy. And because of that, we have things like tectonic plates, which crash into each other. And we have changing ocean currents, and we have clouds that do unexpected things like pour on your head when you're not thinking they should. Where does all that come from? And what does that have to do with the life on this planet? What is life, actually? What is life, and where did it come from? So that's really my overarching question that I try to look at when I write my books. And I try to look at that in terms of science. You know, what can science tell us about why there's life on this planet and how we all fit together? I love evolution. I think it's a fascinating subject. And each of my books looks at evolution. How did butterflies evolve? How did horses evolve? Why do we love horses so much? A lot of people don't know, but the earliest known primate and the earliest known horse showed up in the same place in Wyoming at exactly the same time, only a couple of feet from each other. They evolved in the same location. So of course we love horses, right? Why, you know, we were slated to love horses. And then I wrote a book about squid, and I was interested in that because squid have exactly the same neuron that we have in our brains. Obviously, they do different things, but the neuron itself, the way it functions, the center of the neuron and the axons, the way messages are sent, is exactly the same. And by studying squid, that's actually how scientists learned 100 years ago how our own neurons in our own brains work. And to me, that was fascinating. To me, it shows what the Buddhists say, which is there really is a unity to life. There is a unity to life on this planet, and we really are all the same being. We're really all one being. We just look different. We're the same, but we're different. And so I love writing books that explore those ideas. I love writing books that visit scientists. I think scientists are the coolest people in the whole world. They're so interesting. I love talking to scientists. They're a lot of fun. They like to drink beer after work, and they like to talk about their work. And if you just say, tell me about your work, you don't have to ask any other question, because they'll just talk and talk and talk. And I love the kinds of things that they think about. So what I do in my books, The Language of Butterflies, and also in my horse book, is go around and visit scientists who are thinking about these kinds of questions. You know, when it comes to butterflies, what is it that makes butterflies what they are? Where do they come from? Why do we have them? It turns out that we have butterflies on the earth because flowers evolved. Without flowers, we would probably have no butterflies, because when flowers evolved about 130 million years ago, the planet was filled with moths, which are nighttime insects, mostly, not always. But when flowers appeared, the moths said, oh, why are we why are we only flying at night? There's all this cool stuff during the day. We can get food from these flowers. And then they evolved and turned into butterflies and evolved these wonderful, beautiful patterns that we see on their wings. So this is a funny book, because I meant to write a book that was about conservation success stories. The first place that I went to was a site near Albany, New York, where there was a tremendous conservation success story connected to a really tiny little butterfly called the Carner Blue, which is, I don't know, maybe it's an inch wingspan. It's tiny, 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 but it had begun to disappear, and it was very beloved for many, many reasons, including Vladimir Nabokov, who was a great author in the middle of the 20th century. So that butterfly was disappearing, and 25 years ago, or maybe even 30 years ago now, scientists said, why is that butterfly disappearing? Let's save it. And they worked 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 and they worked, and they couldn't save it. They couldn't find the key to that butterfly. They were failing. And all of a sudden, one of the scientists said, let's look at the ecosystem as a whole. Let's look at the world that this beautiful, gorgeous little thing lives in. And they thought about it, and they looked at paleontology, and the paleontology of the area said, well, before people came and settled and built houses, this area, which was sand dunes, much like the sand dunes I live in, burned all the time. In the summer, it got dry. It's starting to get dry now here. And when that happened, lightning would come, and the lightning would strike the trees, and there would be these little fires all over the place. Those little fires were periodic and routine and normal, and they are keys to that kind of ecosystem. These areas have to burn, and when they burn, new life springs up. And some of the new life that springs up are things called lupins, which are key to this particular butterfly. This little butterfly likes lupins and only lupins. It won't eat, it won't use any other plant but lupins. And if there were no fires, the lupins couldn't grow. So that's how they learned how to conserve this butterfly, by creating a normal ecosystem instead of a falsified ecosystem. And what happened when they saved the butterfly is the whole ecosystem bloomed and blossomed and became incredibly lush. When I walked there and saw how lush it was, I couldn't believe it. It was just gorgeous, not like where I live, where we're not allowed to have fires because obviously people live here. So I looked at that, and then I started learning about the butterflies, and I said, holy smokes, butterflies are really interesting. I don't need to write a book about any other animals. I'm just going to find out more about butterflies. And that's where the book came from.
And you have a really great, in the opening, you talk about being struck by a painting. And then you talk about being struck by the beauty of the butterflies. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because that was something that I, as a art history lover, and those are what my degrees are in, I'm curious about that opening and why you decided to start your story there?
Because I think it's really important. My question was, why do people love butterflies so much? That's what I wanted to know at the beginning of this book. And I concluded it was because the colors are so stunning that from as soon as we open our eyes as infants, we love these stunning colors that glisten and change in the light. You know, you put these kinds of things in front of babies' cribs just so the babies will use their arms and reach out for them. Why is that? Well, I started by talking about Jmw Turner, who, since you studied art history, you'll know who Turner is. And I have a funny story about Turner, because when I grew up, I didn't know anything about art. My education didn't teach anything about art when I was in school in the 50s and the 60s. But as we were talking before about traveling, I decided after 2 years of college that I needed to see the world. I do this. I just get so immersed in my books, and suddenly I look up and say, I've been reading for 2 years and I haven't seen anything. So I took a leave of absence from college, and I wonder how I even paid for the airplane ticket. I don't know, but I went to Europe, and I went to Finland. I stayed there for a couple of months, being a nanny in the country in Finland, which was unbelievable because the country there was gorgeous, and I didn't know anything about blueberries. And in Finland, there were blueberries that were the size of marbles, and there was bread that was so delicious. I'd never had it before. So I stayed there for 2 months, and then I went off to the continent and I hitchhiked around. In those days, that's what we did when we were in our 20s. We just hitchhiked all over the place. So I hitchhiked all over France, and I went down to Italy, and in Italy, I was in Florence. So I said, what the heck? What's an art museum? I think I'll go. And I walked into the Uffizi and I fell over backwards. I had never seen anything like that. Those paintings, they were better than any movie. I mean, they were just alive and vital, and the colors shimmered. And then I saw the Pietà. Had no idea who Michelangelo was. I didn't know any of these people. I just, wow, look what's going on here in the world. This was not happening in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in my age. So I stayed there. I earned some money by doing the grape harvest for a while. And then I went to Paris and worked sweeping floors in a hostel, a youth hostel, for a while. And then I decided to go to England. And in England, I was a barmaid in the Pakenham Arms in Chancery Lane, which I told you before, I was raised a Baptist, so I'd never had any alcohol, you know. Oh, you drink, love? Okay, I'll have a Coke. A Coke? She wants a Coke. They all thought I was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. But on my days off, on Tuesdays, the museums in London were free. So I didn't have any money. What was I going to do? So I went to museums, and in one museum, I walked into, I wish I could remember the name of the museum. To this day, I don't know. And I've actually called the museums and asked them, but I haven't been able to pin it down. There was this huge, massive Jmw Turner painting there. And for people who are listening, Jmw Turner was this artist who, post-Civil War, I guess is when you would put him, he helped to create the Impressionist movement, which we all know and love because we're human and we love those colors. But he used colors in a completely different way. He loved to paint ships on the ocean, and he loved to paint battles and ships of fire and the sunsets and all these colors. Of course, no one had ever seen such things before. And in 1960, whenever it was, what was it? It must have been 1970 by then. I hadn't seen anything either. And I was just awestruck by this huge painting that was filled with all of these colors. So flash forward 50 years, and I decided I would go to Yale and see collections of butterflies there. And the person who was in charge of the butterfly collections brought me out tray after tray after tray of these gorgeous butterflies. Those colors glistened and shimmered just like the Turner paintings. So I was, again, amazed every bit as much as I was amazed by the Turner and the Pietà and all of those things. This was art, but art that was created by nature, not created by human beings. And I eventually he said, okay, that's nice. I have to go back to work now, because I couldn't stop asking questions. I couldn't stop looking at these trays of gorgeous, gorgeous color. So in the book, I looked into that question: why are humans so drawn to these kinds of colors?
But while we're on the topic of color, what is it that creates the color on butterflies? Is it a pigment? Is it something else? I know you explain about it in the book, but I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of a hint.
Isn't that interesting? Because there are a lot of scientists since Maria Sibylla Merian 400 years ago who wanted to know, where does this beauty come from? Exactly. Why are these wings so gorgeous? It was assumed that it was pigment, but nobody could ever actually get pigment out of a lot of these butterfly scales. Some of the scales on butterfly wings, including the dull browns and tans and all these things that camouflage and protect the butterfly, are indeed pigments. Those are pigments. If a butterfly closes its wings, and you'll see the underside is often looks like a dead leaf, in that it's supposed to look like a dead leaf. You're supposed to look at it and think, oh, that's a dead leaf, I don't want to eat that, which birds often do. But when it opens its wings to get the sun, to get energy, you see these gorgeous, gorgeous colors. And it turns out those colors don't come from pigments at all. They come from the structure of the butterfly scales themselves. For example, in the book, and you can see this, I have photos in the book that will show you this fabulous, well, that you don't have the
arc. I didn't get pictures. I need to get the final copy.
I didn't know.
You're like, I have pictures. I was like, where were pictures?
Yeah, I didn't know you had. I would have had them send you an actual book.
That's okay.
But in the center of the real book, instead of the pretend book that you got stuck with, is a whole bunch of photos. And there's 4 different photos that a scientist who's done this research kindly allowed me to use. The structure of these butterfly scales that create this beautiful color are different for each color. You get, first of all, a butterfly scale is as small as a speck of dust. People who work with butterfly scales a lot have to wear masks, not because of COVID, but because they're protecting their lungs, because if all these scales get into their throats, they'll get ill from them. So they wear these masks because these things are so small, you can't really, with a naked eye, see one individual scale. But you can see it with a microscope, and you can see it with a not that powerful microscope. You can see the scale, but to really see how the scale is built, you need these modern, super powerful microscopes, electron microscopes that can look at a mote of dust and make it look like it's a whole world. That mote of dust becomes a whole world. And what you see for the blue Morpho butterflies are these rows upon rows upon rows of what the scientists best describe as Christmas trees. It's like a Christmas tree farm in there. Yeah. And the rows are straight like this, and the Christmas trees are like this. Kind of, I guess, a electric pole is sometimes has that. And the light gets in there, and then to get out, it gets bent. So these close arrangements bend the light in certain ways, and you look at it and you think, I'm seeing this beautiful blue. Why am I seeing such a beautiful blue? And then you look at it and it goes from blue to purple. It changes as you watch it fly by, which to the human brain is particularly entrancing. Wait, what am I looking at? What am I seeing? And you're fascinated by it. That's because as it changes and flies past you, the light is bent in different ways. So the color doesn't stay still. That's what we love about it. The color never stays still. And there are other scales that will make green colors, and they're not Christmas tree shapes. They're kind of circles and spirals and things like that. So it's all done magic. But it's not really magic, it's science.
It's science.
It's magic and it's science, because the light is bent in all these different ways.
But that's the really interesting thing to me too, about you talk about these scientists that are spending all this time, and you who have learned so much. There's a very interesting theme with the scientists and the people who spend their lives studying butterflies. There's an interesting commonality between them, and I'm curious if you could talk about what you learned about these particular humans that devoted their lives to studying butterflies.
This is a unique crowd. Not you won't meet a lot of people like this. But in my opinion, I say that these are people who become addicted to color. You know, when you look at painting, just like wow, look at Turner. Where's that color come from? These are people who become fascinated with the colors of butterflies, often at a very, very early age, and it never lets go of them. Nabokov was very interested in color. He actually had a neural anomaly that when he looked at letters on a page, he saw those letters in colors. He had special, I don't want to call it engineering. His brain reacted in very unique ways so that his world was just much more vibrant and alive with color than most of us. You know, I don't have that artistic bent. I have it for words. I love words, but I don't, you know, I love seeing these colors and learning about him. But for him, he would read a word and the word would have a color to him, you know, and there are a lot of people like that. So it's not surprising that he was addicted to butterflies. A lot of people don't know that not only was he a brilliant novelist and a brilliant man. When you read his stuff, it's just amazing how brilliant he was. I wish I could write like that. But that was his day job. His night job was actually going to Harvard University as a volunteer and studying these little insects and cataloging them and organizing them and writing down the data from them. And he would spend hours and hours with all these tiny little insects going through all of this minutia. You know, that's an addiction. And he did publish, even though he did not have scientific credentials. His work was so good that he did publish when he discovered and described new species. And that fascination with that minutia and that color is something that goes back hundreds of years. People ask my favorite character, and of course, all of them are my favorite characters because I just love learning about them and what were they thinking, what was going on in their minds. But one of my favorites was Maria Sibylla Merian from 400 years ago. Maria was born into a world where women were constantly being burned as witches. It wasn't unusual to burn women as witches. They just got burned. That was just what people did. And sometimes men were burned, but it was usually women. It was usually women who were unusual or stepped outside their boundaries or did something to upset some man or something like that. So she lived a very restricted life. As a girl, she was not allowed to go to school or get a formal education or certainly publish anything formally. And she was fortunate that she grew up in a household with a father who was a publisher. And in those days, what it meant to be a publisher was you just made books. You know, you made books, and he published or made books of catalogs of flowers and plants. And so from the age of 5, it was Maria's job to take her watercolors and fill in, because of course there was no way to print color in those days. So all of those things had to be hand painted. So from the age of 5, she became an expert, highly skilled watercolorist. The father would hand her a page and say, paint these tulips, or, you know, fill in the grass or something like that. And that's what she did with her life. When she wasn't busy working for her father, she went out into her mother's garden. She didn't go much further than that because girls weren't allowed to. But in those days, a new thing was invented called a microscope.
That little thing.
We wouldn't imagine, if we looked at it, we would not think it was a microscope. But for them, it was kind of really like a magnifying glass, but it was a real innovation. And you could buy it. It wasn't super expensive. So she got her hands on one at the age of 13. I don't know how or why. I'm not sure it's recorded anywhere. But she started going around her mother's garden with her little, imagine a magnifying glass. It wasn't really that, but it was similar enough. And she started looking at these things on her mother's plants that were caterpillars. And, you know, my paraphrase, 20th century paraphrase was that she went, holy smoke, look at these guys. They have all these colors on them and they have all these little prickles everywhere. These are really weird. And she just got out her pens and and drawing implements and her painting implements. And she started recording the caterpillars that she saw, just because that's pretty much the only thing there was for her to do. And then she noticed that these particular caterpillars would eat on particular plants and not on other plants. Each caterpillar that was looked in a certain way, we would now use the word species. Each species of caterpillar would eat a particular species of plant. And then that species of caterpillar would make a chrysalis. And out of that chrysalis would come a butterfly. And it was a specific butterfly. It wasn't just any butterfly. So a specific caterpillar needed a specific plant, and it would become a specific butterfly. Believe it or not, in those days, that was groundbreaking work. Because in those days, people believed that nature was helter-skelter. For example, women could give birth to rabbits sometimes. Nobody knew why, but it was for sure that sometimes women had rabbits as babies instead of babies. Or I don't know what the other, well, you know, these were, in those days, human beings didn't know that you should actually try to prove something before you said it.
Right.
No. Right, fine. I've never actually seen a woman give birth to a rabbit, but I'm sure it happened. So Maria created pictures. Each page was a piece of art in which she drew the caterpillar with all its beautiful anomalies, all its colors, gorgeous little dots of gold on it. And so her work was so precise and so intricate. Grew the plants that the caterpillar was eating and made exactly the right kind of leaf damage. And then on the same page, she would also show the emergent butterfly. So she showed the net of nature, and that nature was an organized process. It wasn't helter-skelter. Pretty unlikely, unless you meet a really bad witch, that you're going to give birth to a rabbit, because this is what we actually see happening. So that's what she saw happening. And she created art of this. And then after 20 years, from 13 to 32, she did all these studies, and she wanted to publish them, but she wasn't allowed to because she was only a girl. So she said, well, actually, my father has his own publishing house, so I'll just publish my own book. And she published her own book of this art, and it became an instant bestseller all across Europe. Mm-hmm. And that, children, is how the science of ecology got started. And that's a true story.
And I loved that story. When I was reading the book, that was my favorite parts.
Isn't that wonderful? And that she became renowned for her work, for the beauty of her artistry, as well as for her science. So she became an exception to how women were treated. At one point, she got tired of living in towns in what's now Germany, and she decided, I think I'll go live in Amsterdam. It's a pretty cool place. And it is. You should go to Amsterdam. It's a very cool place. So she went off to Amsterdam, and she met a lot of people who were also interested in butterflies, including a woman who was very wealthy and who had paid people to bring back butterflies, dead pinned butterflies from South America. So Maria would go and see these and look at these and say, these are amazing, but what do they do? They're just dead and pinned. I can't learn, she just couldn't. She had to know what these butterflies actually did. So at the age of 52, she sold everything she had, her artwork, all her possessions and everything. And she got just enough money to pay for her and a daughter of hers to get on a boat and go all by themselves to South America. It was the first completely independent field research study from Europe to the New World. And I stress completely independent because there were other field research studies, but these people were sent by the kings and queens. They, I'd go over there and conquer Mexico or whatever. That's what the travel was about. But Maria said, no, I want to go to South America just because I want to know what these butterflies do. I can't stand the fact that I don't know what they eat and how, what do their caterpillars look like? So she meant to go there for 5 years. She got malaria. She survived malaria, but she was very ill. That's what they think it was malaria. We're not sure. After 2 years, she had compiled a lot of pages for her new book, but she was too ill to stay there. It wouldn't have been safe for her to stay there. So They got in a boat and they came back home. She brought enough exotic things that she could sell them there and sell them in Europe and managed to make a living. And then she took all the pages that she had compiled and put it together into a huge book. I wrote the dimensions of her book in my book, but I don't remember what they are, but they were really large.
Really, really big.
Oh yeah, not that size. They were like really, really large.
Yeah, no, I was trying to see if I could find it because you mentioned it, but I didn't have it marked. So,
No. So
you all listening, you can read it for yourselves and let us know.
She made another book. She self-published another book, and this one was an instantaneous success. She could not get enough of these books in print because people couldn't believe. For example, she brought back a picture of a pineapple. A pineapple? What's that? Where, you know? And of course, she knew all about the blue morphos. So she had beautiful art, huge art of the blue morpho and the blue morpho caterpillar and the plants that they ate and the chrysalis. It was really, I think that book hit the European market the same way some of these most colorful new Disney movies hit. I remember when The Lion King came out and everybody was awed by all that color. That's people in Europe were awed by what she brought back. And of course it was true, which was even better. Then she became very famous and very honored and lived happily ever after.
I feel like she deserves like her own biopic, her own book, her own something. There are
very scholarly books that are written about her, but she deserves a lot more attention than she gets, definitely.
Well, I'm curious too about, because one of the things that I noticed in your book and over the course of our conversation is more often than not in our world, people make art and science the antithesis of each other. And my guess would be that you do not believe that that's the case. And I'm curious.
No, I think they're two sides of the same coin.
Right. How in your book they blend and how butterflies and this study of them can blend the two of them together. And if you could speak on that for a moment.
How can I talk about that? I'm thinking that's a good question. And I'm thinking about what I want to say about it. Art is essential to the human brain. What I found and wrote about in the book was there are neurological reasons why we're drawn to certain colors. And some people have teased some of that out in the human brain, certainly not very much, and we could learn a lot more. For example, I remember learning that one reason why we respond to the color red is the color red is a universal color when people want to get attention for something. All over the world, stoplights are red. They just are. So why are stoplights red? That's because the color red is processed in our brain more quickly than other colors. It has a special pathway that is processed in our brain. It goes much more quickly than the color blue, and we see red like this. So there's reasons for that, and there's a lot of theorizing about why we evolved to love the color red. Red fruit, new grass when it's growing and has more protein is a reddish grass. So there's a reason why we like that and why we pay attention to it. So color is just one manifestation of the energy that I was talking about that's at the molten core of our planet. Our planet has a molten core of energy that seethes and that creates everything that we depend on in the world today. Tectonics, ocean currents, all kinds of things. And one of the manifestations of that energy are colors. So art and science are flip sides. Think of it as the Buddhist yin-yang symbol. Mm-hmm. And there's art on one side and there's science on the other. And they fit together because they're really the same thing. This is something that Buddhists intuited hundreds of years ago. It's amazing what they realized. We look at that yin-yang symbol and we see that curve in the middle as something rigid. But if you learn about Buddhism, you'll learn that that line's not rigid. It's meant to show flow and exchange and movement. And that's what our world is all about.
I want to turn it over. I just feel like I could listen to you. I'm like, this is so wonderful and educational. But I want to turn it over to any of our audience members who might have questions. There is a chat feature next to the YouTube video that you're watching. And if you'd like to type in a question, please feel free to do so.
Do I have that?
Oh, not on you. I'm looking at it.
Okay.
You don't have to do that part. I've got you.
Okay.
But someone wants to know if you had a favorite or a favorite butterfly that you got to see while you were doing your research.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like that's like picking a favorite
child.
I
can't say any of them.
That's really hard.
I'm like a child at a Christmas tree. Which ornament do you love most? That one, that one, that one, that one. You know, you can never make up your mind. So every time I started to learn about a new butterfly, I went, wow, I can't believe that. Mm-hmm. Each of them, to us, if we step back too far, we think they're all the same butterflies. I've seen one, I've seen them all. But when you start to look up close, the same as when you look up close at the structure of a butterfly scale. There are all these differences. They do different things. They behave differently. They need different things. So, of course, I love the monarch, and I wrote in the book a lot about monarchs. Monarchs have a phenomenal lifestyle. You know, we were talking about the little blue butterflies, the Carner blues. Those guys are homebodies. They would be fine during COVID. They didn't need to go anywhere. You know, as long as I have my ants and my plants, I don't care. Monarchs are weeds. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I don't mean they're bad. They just can go anywhere and do anything. They are incredibly flexible. I guess you could say they're kind of like equivalents of crows in the bird world. Mm-hmm. They, you know, you read about monarchs do this, monarchs do that, monarchs do this. And what I found out is sometimes monarchs do this and sometimes they do that. Sometimes they do something completely different. And that's why they're such a fascinating species. The popular story about monarchs is that they live in Canada or North America east of the Rockies. And at a certain time at the end of August, they start to make their amazing migration, flying thousands of miles south till they get to Mexico City. And then, like Roadrunner, make a sharp right and go all the way up to the top of the mountains and spend the winter there. That's pretty interesting, but not all monarchs do that. Some monarchs that live west of the Rocky Mountains don't go to Mexico. Instead, as anyone wise would, they say, oh, it's getting to be dark, it's getting to be cold. I think I'll go to California and find my place in the sun. So they fly all the way to a number of overwintering sites along the California coastline. Other monarch butterflies don't go anywhere. Florida has a lot of monarch butterflies that just stay right where they are. They don't migrate. Why would they? It's Florida. I mean, there's flowers, there's fun, you know, there's tequila. I don't know what they have there, you know, but they don't go anywhere. Then there's a whole population of monarchs who, for some reason, got all the way to Australia. And when they got to Australia, some of them decided to do a migration and others of them don't migrate at all. So they're really flexible. Their behavior can change. I'm not going to use the word easily. Their behavior can smoothly change in a variety of ecosystems, depending on what ecosystems conditions they're faced with. One thing that they can't do is eat anything other than milkweed. Yeah. Monarchs have to have milkweed. Fortunately, there are a lot of different species of milkweed in the world. Again, I forget the number, but it's an immense number. And there's milkweed everywhere, milkweed in New Zealand, milkweed in Australia, milkweed on Guam, the island of Guam. So this is not a problem for them. I guess there's no milkweed in Africa because as far as I know, monarchs don't live in Africa. Monarchs do sometimes land in Europe, but they don't have the right things, so they don't overwinter there. There's not a stable population there. So I found that really interesting, that this is a tiny little butterfly that in some ways genetics have instilled a rote series of behaviors with them, but those series of behaviors can change when the world changes around them.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, other butterflies don't have that flexibility at all. And then, of course, there's the blue Morpho, which is this quite large, stunningly beautiful butterfly that lives in south of Mexico, in the jungles down there. And I think his lifestyle is pretty limited. We have a lot of blue Morphos up here that you can go and see in butterfly exhibitions, that sort of thing. But they're brought here. You can raise them. I guess there's butterfly farms that raise them or something, but they don't live here normally. But they are amazingly beautiful. One of the things that I wish I could do is go where they fly naturally in the jungle, because one of the scientists that I talked to talked about flying over some jungle areas where clouds of blue Morphos rose up underneath him under the airplane, and he just saw this beautiful shimmering color under, like a carpet of blue Morphos underneath him. So I don't know. I'm like, which candy do you want? Okay, I'll have them all. I'll just take all of this candy and then I'll think about it.
Sounds good. Well, but I'm curious. You talk about, you've written about horses and squid, and before we went live, you mentioned being a travel writer. What is next? What's your newest addiction? Can you talk about that with us?
I'm not sure. I have a lot of ideas.
Okay.
And I actually had some talks with some people today. So
nice.
We'll see where all of it goes. I hope at some point to write a book about hiking all over the world. Why do people walk? Why are we such compulsive walkers? We are compulsive walkers.
I have a book recommendation for you. There's an excellent book called A Walking Life by Antonia Malchik, which is wonderful.
A Walking Life. Okay, I'm definitely getting that book.
It's excellent. She did an event with us, and it's again about the science of walking and stuff. And so I think it'd be a great resource for you.
Yes. Why? Well, my question would be why? Why do we do that? What's different about us that other animals don't do that? Other animals don't say, I think I'll just go walk around the world. Some of the crazy walks, I've already started reading some of the crazy walks. I think it was in the 1920s. There was this fad for who could walk the farthest. So people, maybe it was earlier than that. There were contests, like in New York City, they would use these sports arenas. What are the equivalent of modern sports arenas? And all the competitors would walk there, and they would walk until they dropped, and the person who dropped last was the winner. And people love to go to this. It was like a really big thing. The Manhattanites would all go there and bet on who's going to walk the farthest. And it was a thing, It was very popular, common. Why? Why do people want to go and sit and watch other people walk until they drop? Or why do people set themselves these goals? I think I'll walk the Appalachian Trail. That's only 2,200 miles. Sure, why not?
No big deal.
Why are you doing that? That was my curiosity. Why is it, what is it that you want out of that activity? Why do people just get up one day and just start walking? People who've never walked before, and it becomes a compulsion for them. Particularly older people, they really start to want to walk in a lot of different places. And one of the things you notice is, as people get older, sometimes Alzheimer's patients, that's what they do. They go out the door and they just walk. What is that about? There must be some kind of basic neurology there that I can't wait to find out about. So it's called A Walking Life. I'm going to read that book.
Yes, A Walking Life by Antonia Malchik. I'll send it to your publicist, and she can give you the information as well. But great. I want to just sincerely say thank you. This was so fascinating, and your book was wonderful to read and just learn something that I, again, being an art lover of all kinds, this was a really great introduction into something more scientific than I'm used to. And so I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to get a copy, which you can get at tatteredcover.com, or like I said, some of our stores are open, and I do know for certain we have copies on our shelves. It's much prettier than this art copy that I have. There's a beautiful metallic cover.
Usually I have one that I can flash. But I don't have it on my desk because it flashes just like the blue Morpho does.
It does, and it's gorgeous. So, Wendy, is there? Do you want to just tell everybody where they can find you online, or any last minute thoughts that you have?
Well, I have a website that you can go to, and the best way to connect with me is on Facebook. I like Facebook. I know it's not very cool to like it, but I like Facebook because I've met a lot of interesting people there, and we have a lot of interesting exchanges of ideas. So people on Facebook are people who read my books and are interesting and have interesting comments to make. Some are dog people, some are horse people, a few are squid people. Not that many are squid
Not
people.
that many.
But now there's a lot of butterfly people there too. So that's probably the best way to get in contact.
Wonderful. And like I said before, you guys can get The Language of Butterflies at Tattered Cover. We thank you guys so much for joining us. Wendy, if you'll stick around, even though after we end the live stream, that would be wonderful. But thank you guys again for joining us. We hope you guys are staying safe, wash your hands, and happy reading. So until next time, guys. And we're out.